a high-tech control room.
He is looking at everything that's going on here.
Railroad cars hauling urgent cargo.
Get it into a rail car as fast as we can.
On a mission to create the world's most popular brew.
We have a presence in over 80 countries.
It's a cultural icon, a bubbling legend.
Probably the most recognized beer label in the world.
It's the Mega Brew from the Mega Factory of Anheuser-Busch. Beer. It's the world's most popular alcoholic beverage. Every year, factories brew around 150 billion liters. That's enough to fill 50,000 Olympic swimming pools. And one factory brews more than all the others. They've pioneered high technology and high volume to deliver the world's most popular beer. What are the steps, secrets, and science behind their legendary brew? Enter the ultimate factory of Anheuser-Busch in St. Louis, Missouri, the home of Budweiser.
It's an amazing place. It's like this every day. We produce, package, and ship our beers 7 days a week, 24 hours a day.
With structures standing as tall as 9 stories, this more than 400,000 square meter brewery is both awe-inspiring and tradition-rich. But don't let the old-fashioned facade fool you. Inside, this manufacturing Goliath is a state-of-the-art technological marvel capable of producing more than 375 million liters of beer a year, enough to fill the gas tanks of more than 6 million cars. For visitors to the brewery, the numbers can be astounding.
I was impressed with the volume. I was like, wow, that's a lot of beer.
It's just billions and billions of bottles of beer that they make.
The challenge? Make every drop taste like the perfect Budweiser. It's a daunting task. The smallest variable in crop quality, temperature, or texture can dramatically change the taste of the beer. If any part of the production process is off by just a fraction, thousands of liters of beer and millions of dollars could go down the drain.
If we have a batch that goes bad on us for whatever reason, we don't hesitate to dump it.
So how do you transform hops, barley, rice, and water into the beer called Budweiser? Here in the Anheuser-Busch beer brewing city, the action takes place at 4 critical areas. There's the mill, where the grains are crushed. The brew house, where the raw ingredients are boiled, cooked, and strained to create a sugary soup called wort. Then there's the vast Pestalozzi Street cellar, where the brew is fermented, creating alcohol. And there's the immense 109,000 square meter packing facility, where everything comes together and is prepared for shipping. But before you get here, you've got to travel about 2,500 kilometers west to Idaho Falls, Idaho, USA, where some say the soul of the beer is born. Here, barley, the essential and historic basic cereal in beer, germinates and then slowly roasts in a process called malting.
Barley that is in here was planted about 6 weeks ago, and in about 8 more weeks it'll be harvested and sent to one of our storage elevators.
To begin the process, speeding conveyor belts transport the raw barley from the grain silos. Their destination? Giant 7-meter-high steeping tanks. Organized in rows of 12, the combined tanks can hold 200,000 kilograms of barley, enough to make more than 1 million liters of beer.
Right now we're on the steep floor at the Idaho Falls Malt House. Steeping is the very first step in the malting process, and we're at the very beginning.
During steeping, The factory immerses the grains in water until they begin to sprout.
We're tricking the barley seed or barley kernel into thinking it's going to grow a barley plant. By doing that, we add an enormous amount of water to it so that it can uptake the moisture that it needs so that it can start to grow the rootlets and the endosperm of the stalk.
Then, the brewer opens a series of valves underneath the tanks, and gravity takes over. The grains dump onto one of 8 massive germinating beds. The next step, flatten it. And these are the tools for the job. Spinning augers, huge blades that sweep over the germinating beds and evenly spread out the grain.
As it's germinating, it's sprouting, the rootlets are forming, and it's actually will get very nice and tight on you. So the turning machine will come through periodically during that 4-day process and keep the malt turned up, and so it doesn't all grow together.
Now the real work begins. For 4 days, the water-soaked barley kernels grow tiny roots. Filled with enzymes, these roots convert starches into fermentable sugars, the magic ingredient of beer. Without this sugar, later there'd be no alcohol. But there's a catch. Brewers are only interested in growing the rootlets, not the whole plant. So, how do you stop Mother Nature? Heat.
In malting, just before that green shoot is about to emerge from the kernel, you stop the germination. You put the barley into a kiln and you kiln dry it and then roast it or toast it in order to develop flavor.
Conveyor belts whisk the grain into monster kilns. Ovens 30 meters in diameter, almost 1.5 meters deep and stuffed with more than 400,000 kilograms of barley.
Feels like I'm being roasted in an oven.
Just like roasting coffee, the kiln pushes hot 85-degree air through the grain, drying off any moisture.
Depending on how much you roast that malt is going to depend on the flavor profile you'll get in the beer.
Since Budweiser is a clear golden beer, its barley is lightly kilned, producing what's known as a pale malt.
Initially you go through sort of the copper colors and the toffee flavors, and then as you get to higher and higher temperatures, then you develop really dark colors and you develop a more roasted, astringent, mocha, chocolate, these sorts of characteristics.
With malting completed, it's on to the next step, a rail operation of mega proportions. Each day, rail operators load more than 900,000 kilograms of flavor-packed malt into rail cars. That malt will become Budweiser. Back in 1860, Eberhard Anheuser, a German immigrant, took over a failed St. Louis brewery. In those days, beer was a relatively new passion.
The brewing industry in the United States really didn't begin until the 1840s. Prior to that, Americans just didn't drink much beer. They preferred liquor, especially whiskey. But when there was a big influx of German immigrants in the 1840s and 1850s, they brought beer with them.
But on-the-go Americans didn't take to the German-style beer, a thick, heavy lager. They preferred something lighter.
Germans preferred beer like that because they'd grown up in a world where food was often scarce. To them, a stein of beer was quite literally liquid bread.
Brewers experimented with their formulas for about a decade, adding new ingredients like rice and corn. In the 1870s, they came up with a new style they called Golden Lager. One golden lager in particular would rise above the rest to become the best-selling beer in the world. That beer was Budweiser. Since their first stein, Anheuser-Busch has brewed more than 1 billion barrels of Budweiser. Measured out in cases, that'd be enough to stack an American football field 25 kilometers high with beer. St. Louis, Missouri, the ultimate beer-making factory, the Anheuser-Busch Brewery. Here, malted grain will be crafted into American Budweiser beer. Behind this old-world architecture, this plant's a technological wonderland. From robots and sonic wave sensors to gravity-defying conveyor belts. The only thing dated about this factory is the brickwork.
Correct.
Good luck.
This area we're in right now is called the brew house control room.
And this is the nerve center of it all, the control room. Nearly every piece of machinery in the brew house is wired with sensors to give feedback. If there's a problem, these operators will pick it up.
These operators can see in real time what's going on as we produce a Budweiser brew, from the start of adding the water to adding the grain, and ensure that all our temperatures are hit. And there's a lot of different quality checks they have to make to ensure that we're meeting our exact standards throughout the process.
But there's one person that tops all the computers, sensors, and scientific gizmos. Meet Doug Molman, the chief brewmaster. His taste buds have the final say.
Well, it's kind of like the chief chef. The individual that in the brewery is the one responsible for the brewing of the beer, from raw material all the way to the final product, making sure that the process is done properly and that the outcome is what was expected.
The Budweiser brewing process begins in the brewery's mill. Here, operators crush the malted barley and rice into a fine powder. Rice, a surprising ingredient, is used to give Budweiser its distinct, crisp, light taste.
It allows us to make a beer that's very light, very crisp, very refreshing, without a lot of sweetness or fullness that you would get from an all-malt beer.
From the mill, a pneumatic system blows the pulverized grains through a series of pipes to the center of the beer campus, a 6-story stone building called the brew house.
Everything about Anheuser-Busch said, this is a place and this is a people that value quality. We will spare no expense, we will make the best beer, and we will have the most beautiful brewery. They weren't just functional, they were attractive pieces of architecture.
This whole building is known as the hot side of the brewery. In 3 steps, barley, rice, and water will be turned into mash, then strained and boiled into a sugary liquid called wort. The first step, mashing. It takes place on the 2nd floor of the brew house. Inside these 2-story high vessels called mash tuns, steam coils spray the pulverized barley and rice with a hot mist. The result, a hot, watery grain porridge.
We're using a mash tun, which is a large vessel with steam coils inside of it and a giant mixer in the bottom, because you want to have good agitation and good contact between malt and water, and also with the heating elements.
The heat causes the enzymes in the malted barley to leap into action. Their job? Convert starch into sugar. Later, this sugar will be made into alcohol.
So when you first mix malt and water and you taste it, not very sweet. After a half an hour, after an hour at the right temperatures, it becomes intensely sweet, and that's because the enzymes are slowly converting the starch to simple sugars.
A single mash tun is capable of producing about 400 barrels of this sweet beer slurry every 2 hours. But to make that much porridge, you need water, and a lot of it. At Anheuser-Busch, every drop is carbon filtered.
Purified brewing water that we use to brew our beers.
The aim? Make it as odorless, tasteless, and as neutral as possible. Just to make sure, Every batch of treated water gets the Brewmaster taste test.
Beer is between 90 and 95% water. You've got to make darn sure that it tastes good. And, you know, the Brewmaster is tasting almost as much water as they are beer during a given day.
Incidentally, if at this stage the brewmasters were making a batch of light beer, like Bud Light, this is where it would be born. To create a light beer, the enzymes in the barley are allowed to eat longer, consuming more starches and carbohydrates. The result? A signature Budweiser taste with more than 30 less calories a serving.
I'm a real big fan of Bud Light. That's what I drank, that's what my dad drank, and it's kind of passed down, I guess.
The next step of the brewing process is called lautering, the technical name for straining. During lautering, the mash is pumped up to 6 filtration vessels called lauter tons. Here, 25-degree water drenches the grain bed, helping to extract remaining sugar from the mash. Now, the sugary liquid filters through a false bottom in the tank, leaving the barley and rice particles behind.
And as you draw liquid off the bottom, slowly it will begin to clear up, and we have, for the first time, something that begins to look like beer.
The perfect Budweiser every time. That's the goal of the Anheuser-Busch factory in St. Louis, Missouri, USA. The strategy seems to work. Around the world, 1 barrel, the equivalent of 360 servings, is sold every second. But how do you unite the world behind an international brand? Enter the Budweiser Clydesdales. 900 kilograms of instant recognition.
You see Clydesdales in red, you know that somehow Budweiser beer is involved.
The Clydesdale tradition started more than 70 years ago as a way to celebrate the end of Prohibition. Decked out in red and white, a team of horses delivered a case of beer to the governor of New York. It was a stroke of marketing genius. Today, Anheuser-Busch has 5 traveling teams of 8 horses. They're equine superstars, on the road more than 300 days a year.
They have just grown tremendously and become a major corporate icon, and they do parades and special events and functions all over the country.
In between gigs, the Clydesdales get to kick up their hooves in the palatial St. Louis stables. Built in 1865 by Adolphus Busch, this red brick building is a U.S. historic landmark. And over the years, it's lost none of its sheen.
He spared no expense in building structures that were beautiful to look at. His stable had stained glass windows made by Tiffany. That exemplifies Adolphus Busch.
Looking after these international icons is a full-time occupation. These gentle giants have a healthy appetite. Each day, a Clydesdale consumes 22 kilograms of hay and nearly 113 liters of water. And then there's the matter of their accommodation. Grooms must keep the stables spotless.
The importance of having a nice, clean stable and everything first class, it just reflects the image of the whole corporation.
And to make sure these world-famous ambassadors remain recognizable, Anheuser-Busch breeds each generation to look like the very first team.
Their coloring, their markings for Anheuser-Busch, we have kind of bred to get the bay color, the black mane and tail, the white legs, and the white strip in their face.
They're a sign of an earlier time, but the Clydesdales continue to represent the history of Anheuser-Busch and the tradition of Budweiser. In the St. Louis brewery, a block from the stables, is the 6-story brew house. Here, brewers have been mashing and lautering Budweiser's ingredients, all in preparation for the 3rd step in the brewing process, spicing. This critical step takes place on the first floor of the brew house. Here, hops are about to be added to that sugary soup that's now called wort. Anheuser-Busch gets their hops from all over the United States and Europe. These small pine cone-shaped flowers give Budweiser its unique smell and taste.
Each variety has its own signature aroma and taste. And that's how we evaluate hops. We not only look at hops in terms of their resin content, but we also smell them. We evaluate them. It's called a hand evaluation, where you actually rub the hops and smell them.
For brewers, adding the hops is a critical step. If these flavorful flowers are cooked at too high or too low a temperature, or added at the wrong time, as many as 2 million liters of beer could be totally ruined.
We want to add hops at a certain time because we have a specific boiling time for each brand that we make. Some brands are more bitter, some brands are less bitter, so it's important that we follow the amount of hops that we're adding and that we're boiling for the exact amount of time that's required in the recipe.
The wort inside these kettles will become Budweiser. So once the brew operators add the hops, Doug and his fellow brewmasters frequently sample the product to make sure it's on the right track.
We are going to take a sample to look at what's called the kettle break, to see how well our boil is doing. We want to make sure everything's getting mixed right, and we want to make sure that we're at the right temperature. It looks good.
Up until now, the brewers have done all their work on what's called the hot side. But the payoff for all the hard work happens on the other half of the brewery, known as the cold side.
You have a hot, boiling liquid. It's full of hops. Now what you want to do is get it ready for fermentation.
Besides Budweiser, Anheuser-Busch also brews more than 40 unique flavors. To show them off, the brewing company comes here, the Great American Beer Fest. It's billed as the record holder for having more beer on tap than anywhere else on Earth. This festival is the flagship of the American beer-making renaissance. In the last 30 years, the number of breweries in America has swelled from about 50 to more than 1,500. Along with that growth, there's been a change of attitude. Today, brewing beer is regarded as much of an art as making wine.
Beer has most unbelievable heritage, particularly in this country. And we have every bit of a story to tell between our ingredients, the way it's brewed, the different styles, the different flavors, the varieties, the care.
And if there's any doubt that it's a good time to be an American brewer, 41,000 beer-mad festival goers should convince you otherwise.
Just when I walked in here, there's people out the door around the back. Everyone's chanting to get in. It's just like everyone loves it.
Here, 400 breweries and more than 1,600 unique tasting beers are fighting for attention.
Oh, it's unreal. I mean, kidding me. We're in the biggest brew festival in the whole world. We're making low alcohol beer and we're getting reception like, it's unbelievable.
Over 3 days, a whopping 68,000 liters of beer will flow. And right in the center of the frothy madness is Anheuser-Busch.
We've got 34 beers that we're sampling here. We've got 45 people throughout a 3-day period that are here volunteering for us, sampling out all our beers.
But why does a company that already produces more than half of America's beer feel the need to be here? It's simple. As American beer tastes have evolved, a large part of the U.S. beer drinking market is turning to unique and adventurous beer flavors. In response, Anheuser-Busch has been busy developing a range of specialty beers.
Lemon, lime, and orange peels.
And with flavors like chocolate, vanilla oak, and pumpkin spice on tap, this major brewer is having no problems attracting beer fans here.
The reason people will come to the Great American Beer Festival is to celebrate the beer culture, to celebrate beer's heritage, and to celebrate what can be. It's a beautiful melting pot of our industry, big and small. It's a wonderful place to be.
At the ultimate Budweiser factory in St. Louis, Missouri, USA, Anheuser-Busch is creating beer on a mega scale. So far, on the hot side of the brewery, malted barley, rice, and hops have been milled, mashed, and boiled into wort, a potent amber brew that looks like beer. But it can't be called beer until it takes a journey through the cold side of the brewery and 3 transforming steps: fermentation, beechwood aging, and the bubbly finale, krausening. For beer lovers, the first step in the cold side, fermentation, may be the most important. Here, wort is transformed into an alcoholic beverage, and the magic ingredient that makes it all happen, yeast.
The next step is pitching the yeast. Pitching is a very important process because that's when you begin to make beer.
Brewers feed the chilled wort into supersized 15-meter-high fermentation tanks. Then they add 50 barrels of yeast into each tank.
We want to add a specific amount of yeast so that we can control that fermentation.
Yeast is so crucial to the distinct flavor and nature of the beer that Anheuser-Busch has used the same yeast strain since 1876. It's a closely guarded commodity, kept under lock and key.
It's very important. You know, we keep our yeast cultures in a safely guarded place, keep them frozen in liquid nitrogen to preserve their integrity.
But what's yeast, and how does it work its magic? At the University of California campus in Davis, California, USA, yeast is under investigation. Here, biologist Kyria Boundy Mills studies these microscopic organisms, hoping to unlock their hidden potential.
We have about 7,000 yeasts in here, belong to about 450 different species. We have yeast isolated out in nature from insects, soil, plants, all kinds of natural habitats from all around the world.
One of Kyria's most exciting jobs? Identifying and characterizing new species. It's a challenging microscopic treasure hunt. Yeast cells are tiny. To demonstrate their size, Kyria dissolves 1 granule of baking yeast in water.
It's going to take a few minutes for it to dissolve, really.
1 yeast granule is made up of thousands of yeast cells.
Those are the individual yeast cells.
Each yeast cell is a separate organism, a single-cell fungi. But to Kyria, they're a minute workforce with the potential of turning waste into ethanol, grape juice into wine, and wort into beer. Here's how it works. Yeast cells eat unrefined sugars like the ones found in fruit and milk, or in the case of beer brewing, wort. Once brewers add yeast to the sweet wort brew, the ravenous yeasts gorge themselves on the sugars and, as a byproduct, produce alcohol and carbon dioxide. Called fermentation, this process turns wort into beer.
When it's actively growing, one of these yeast cells can eat its weight in sugar in about an hour. They're very hungry.
For brewers, the yeast at UC Davis may contain some hidden treasures. Each yeast strain has different fermentation characteristics that affect the flavor and nature of the beer. Who knows what new beer flavors may be discovered? In the Pestalozzi Street cellar at the Anheuser-Busch Brewery in St. Louis, brewers keep a close watch on the fermentation process. If left alone, a yeast-sized appetite can quickly cause a disaster by creating too much alcohol and ruining the beer's flavor.
The yeast really starts to grow, starts to really take off in a big way in 48 hours, producing carbon dioxide, alcohol, and a lot of heat. And that's why the fermentation tanks have to have cooling jackets on them to keep the temperature exactly where you want it.
Remarkably, the choice of yeast and the regulation of temperature can mean the difference between a light-colored lager or a dark ale. Ale yeasts are fermented at a higher temperature. They work harder and deliver a fruitier, fuller taste. Lager yeasts work at a cooler temperature. The result? A more modest, understated taste. Budweiser beer is made with lager yeast in a process that lasts around 6 days.
By the end of the 6th day, most of the sugar is depleted. The yeast has said, I'm done working, and begins to settle out to the bottom of the tank.
The 7th day of fermentation marks an important brewing milestone. What was once wort can finally be called beer.
However, if you were to taste the beer at that point, you would say it doesn't taste so good. Typically, a lager-style beer at the end of that primary fermentation is pretty raw.
To get the distinct taste Budweiser is known for, brewmasters rely on the next step, a centuries-old process called beechwood aging.
These are beechwood chips. The way they are milled at the sawmill is in such a way that they curl up. So when they sit at the bottom of the tank, they don't lay flat. So when the yeast settles out on top of the wood, it provides for that very important contact between the yeast and the beer.
Loading and removing beechwood from the tank is a job that falls to 3-man teams who bear more resemblance to cave dwellers than beer manufacturers.
When you get in that tank, you look around, and you say, wow, this looks just like a spaceship or something, and only if it could fly.
Wearing special clean suits, 2 men work on the inside of the tank, with 1 team member on the outside. To fill the tank, they first load steel mesh cylinders called torpedoes with strands of beechwood. The torpedoes are placed next to an opening near the bottom of the tank. The men inside the tank then use rakes to evenly spread out the beechwood along the bottom.
It's very hard work, but once you get used to it and you know all the moves and the techniques, it becomes real easy.
When it comes to making American Budweiser, the brewmasters at the United States factory in St. Louis, Missouri have honed the process to a fine science. Brewmasters put the beer through almost 200 quality checks before the mega brew leaves the brewery. But why create a fine product if no one knows about it? This is where Anheuser-Busch's marketing machine comes into play. The brewmaker uses broadcast and print media to get the Budweiser message out. Their main focus, sporting events. During Super Bowl week alone, Americans purchase close to 4 billion servings of beer.
Well, the real reason we're involved in sports is that's where the beer consumer is. It really cuts across really the whole world, multiple countries. If our consumer wasn't a big sports sort of fan, then our dollars would probably go somewhere else.
The company's marketing strategy has worked. Not only is the Budweiser brand a hit in the States, it's also available in more than 80 countries. It's the best-selling packaged brand in both Canada and the UK. And in Anheuser-Busch's Wuhan, China plant, almost 3.5 million barrels of beer are brewed each year to meet the high demand in Asian countries. Back at the St. Louis factory, a batch of Budweiser has been prepped for beechwood aging. There's really only one thing missing now in this beer, and that's the bubbles. They come from a German process called krausening. Krausening works by pumping a small amount of that sugary soup called wort back into the brew. That starts the fermentation process all over again. Only this time, brewers capture the carbon dioxide that is released during the process. The trapped CO2 causes the tank to build pressure, and during the aging process, the beer becomes naturally carbonated. Pour a Budweiser, and the frothy, foamy head is a direct result of krausening. It's a signature look of lager that's taken very seriously. To make sure the brewers have got it just right, researchers use automatic pourers and foam analyzers to measure the bubbly beer head. Will Allen is the brewmaster at Anheuser-Busch's Pilot Brewery.
This particular instrument measures foam. take our samples out of the foam bath, place them into these two slots, and then this is an automatic pour for us so that we always have the most consistent pour possible, and then we measure the amount of seconds it takes for the foam to collapse.
For a Budweiser, a good head of foam should hold up for about 120 seconds. Collapse too quickly, and it's a red flag indicator for brewmasters.
If the foam is collapsing too fast, it might indicate that there is an issue with the way we chill-proof and filter our beers, or perhaps a problem in our brew hall where we add hops to the kettle, because hops are good for foam retention and foam development.
After krausening, the beer is allowed to sit for 21 days and age naturally. While brewmasters await the outcome of this Budweiser brew, exciting work is happening next door at Anheuser-Busch's pilot brewery. Responsible for more than just quality control, this brew kitchen discovers and tests new beer flavors. It's a complete mini brewery. Small and efficient, it can produce a batch of just 9 barrels. Will and his team go beyond traditional ingredients and spicing techniques in a quest to find the company's next bubbly hit.
We can also get pretty fancy sometimes with some of our new products. We'll age a beer on ground vanilla beans and staves actually taken from bourbon oak barrels. It's not just hops that you can add to a kettle to make a beer.
The company does make a lot of decisions based on a lot of the specials that we run. You'll go in the supermarket and see a product that you yourself help develop.
Back at the brew house, it's nervous time. Fermentation, aging, and krausening are complete. Now, the brewmasters are about to find out whether they'll be toasting sweet success or mourning a 110,000-gallon failure.
Can you notice how I'm pouring these right down the middle?
Brewmaster Doug Molman has been watching over the process every step of the way. It's time for the final taste test on a batch of Budweiser that's scheduled to be packaged and shipped to wholesalers.
We just want to make sure that it's really where we want it to be, because at this point forward, we package the beer.
Even a minor variation in flavor must be accounted for.
The brewmaster will line up all the tanks that are due to pump in the next 24 hours and begin to make some blending decisions. This tank gets blended with this tank, that kind of thing. Yeah, let's blend that with another tank.
Blending is the art of brewing. So how does it work? If Doug tastes the beer samples and finds 2 tanks have a different level of bitterness, he may decide to blend the 2 tanks together or blend them with a tank that's a bit sweet. The end result must taste like a perfect Budweiser.
You want to look at the foam, you want to look at the color, how brilliant it is to make sure that it's clear and the color is where we want it to be. That's rich, it holds its head. And then next step, of course, is smelling. We give it a little bit of a swirl just to release some of the volatiles. Being able to swirl a beer glass is a sign of an experienced taster.
A successful taste test is the culmination of a demanding brewing process.
The beer at this point is as good as it's going to get. This is the peak of flavor.
And there it is. Doug has crowned this brew a Budweiser. Every day, the St. Louis, USA Anheuser-Busch plant fills almost 18 million containers of Mega Brew. Despite the sheer volume, Budweiser brewmasters have tasted the beer at every stage of the process until it's time to crown the king of beers. Soon, it'll be time to get the beer from the factory to you. For this, Anheuser-Busch relies on a vast network of distribution centers, about 700 in the U.S. alone.
This one is key in that we receive the product, we store the product, and we deliver the product and satisfy the customer's needs.
Every year, 10 million cases of beer pass through the Anheuser-Busch distribution hub in Denver, Colorado.
This operation will service about a 25 square mile radius, so it's not a very large radius, yet because we're the center of population for the state of Colorado, you have about 2 million people that reside in here.
With 100,000 square feet and the capacity to store 500,000 cases at one time, it can be a major challenge to move all that beer.
Yeah, it's a little tricky sometimes. Traffic on the side, so cars don't squeeze in when I'm making my turn.
And out in the field, as one of Budweiser's trusted drivers, Jose Castillo is literally where the rubber meets the road. With 8 years of experience in the cab, here in downtown Denver, he can log around 12,000 miles a year.
This is the Funky Buddha. This is the name of the restaurant, it's Funky Buddha.
Each of these cases weigh almost 40 pounds. In this dolly alone, Jose lifts 6 of them.
Actually, I wake up at 3:30 in the morning, 3 times a week, and I go ahead and do a workout for about an hour and a half, and then I come to work. The kegs are pretty heavy. They're 168 pounds, and you know, I mean, going up and down stairs with kegs sometimes, you know, it takes a tear on you. We got a full keg.
For many of these establishments, Jose is the face of Anheuser-Busch.
You got to get them to trust you, for one. You got to be around them and do what you say you're going to do and actually go in there and do it. Every time I go into a cooler, I got to rearrange the coolers. That's every stop, got to do it. It's very rare when you got to stop that you actually don't have to rearrange the cooler. So there's a little bit of time, takes a little bit of time to do it all. But, you know, makes the customers happy.
With the payment taken care of, he's off. Today, Jose will go on to drive at least 40 miles. It helps to know that he'll be well received. Back at the Budweiser factory, workers are preparing for the final step. And if you think you've seen all the wonder and amazement, well, think again. Welcome to the Anheuser-Busch packaging plant. With more than 27 acres of storage space, the packaging facility's size alone would make it incredible. At nearly 1.2 million square feet, it's more than 46 times larger than the American White House. But even more impressive than its jaw-dropping dimensions is its lightning speed.
Our bottle lines will run at 1,300 bottles a minute. That's almost 1.8 million 12-ounce containers in a day. And then our can lines will run at 2,000 cans a minute. That's a little more than 2.7 million cans, 12-ounce cans in a day.
Packing at Anheuser-Busch takes place in a multi-story building. This presents a tricky problem. How do you get the cans between floors? The solution? Gravity-defying conveyor belts called high and low riders. Here's how they work. Vacuums embedded in the conveyor belts use suction to hold the cans in place. Even when the cans move vertically between floors on their way to the filling machines.
The beer is delivered to the packaging process from the finished beer tanks where the beer is in its most pristine state. The beer is then pumped down to us in our filling process.
The filler machine puts exactly 12 ounces of beer in each container. Then the cans are sealed.
There's a piece of equipment that we call a seamer. At 2,000 cans a minute, we accurately place a lid on the can and mechanically seam it at that rate of speed. Those pieces of equipment are phenomenal.
For bottles, the process is slightly different. First, they're given a shower.
We receive bottles. We first rinse those bottles in a rotary rinser. Then that bottle then is presented to the filler, where it's then filled at a very slow rate from the bottom up to ensure a gentle quality fill.
A quality fill refers to a precise fill of 12 ounces of beer in each bottle. Anheuser-Busch uses sonic wave technology to guarantee it.
We have on the discharge of our filling machines is a piece of equipment called a Hoyt inspector. We know that when we put a sound wave on the top of the bottle where the crown is, we'll get back a particular sound or vibration. That machine will sense what a normal fill level is, and depending on the fill level, you'll get a different sound or a different sonic wave back.
The majority of bottles are precisely filled, but every once in a while, the Hoyt inspector machine senses a bottle that's improperly filled. The machine then immediately picks up the defective container and discards it.
From that point, when it gets off of the filler, very quickly then, you can see the beer start to foam out of the bottle. We put a crown or a cap, if you would, on that bottle.
Capping the beer quickly protects it from oxygen, which might destroy the beverage's freshness. At the St. Louis factory, lab technicians keep a watchful eye on this age-old enemy with the help of a tool called an orbisphere. Quality analyst Diane Vogt is testing a bottle of beer just plucked from the line.
It lets us know that we're running good beer, that we're running good fills. What it does is measure oxygen and CO2 in the package sample.
And if the bottle fails the orbisphere test, Diane alerts the foreman. It could mean something has gone wrong at the filling machines. This one, though, is ready to go.
Oh, this gets an A+. This is right on the money. Perfect beer.
Once filled and capped, it's on to a state-of-the-art labeling machine. It stamps 800 bottles per minute.
We actually use this vision system, a system of optical cameras that look at each and every bottle, the position of the bottle on the handling pad, and if the bottle isn't in the right position, the vision system sends a signal to the PLC that turns the bottle just right to ensure that we put the label on the bottle perfectly each and every time.
Once the labels are on, a global packaging machine puts the beer inside cases or cartons.
It does it very gently and very elegantly. That way we can ensure the bottles are well presented inside of the case, and when that consumer opens that case up, he or she gets 24 perfect bottles of beer.
Then, the beer is taken to a cavernous 40,000 square meter warehouse that's adjacent to the packaging building. Inside the warehouse, a frenetic operation is constantly underway to get the beer to stores as quickly as possible.
We'll generally see in a 24-hour period of full goods anywhere from 330 to 370 trucks. In addition to that, we'll load about 15 rail cars a day.
While shipping and loading are typically thought of as hard hat jobs that require little technology, at the St. Louis warehouse, the process is almost completely automated.
We have a bill of lading system that's just totally paperless. Each fork truck has what's called a radio frequency terminal. So it's a wireless terminal that allows the fork truck operator to communicate back with the mainframe system. And it'll give that information to the fork truck operator as to where to go.
The pressure to move millions of pounds of cargo might seem like a daunting job. But the employees at the St. Louis facility don't see their work as just a job or their product as just cargo.
When I see all that volume, I really see one beer at a time, because I know it sounds cliche, but that's how it's consumed. And all of that volume is truly a function of demand. And the demand is there, in my mind, because of the quality and the consistency of our product.
Barley, rice, and hops. They're the simple elements that make up an 8,000-year-old beverage. Today, one brand has become the most popular beer in the world. It's steeped in history and brewed by American craftsmen.
You look at the Anheuser-Busch plant. They've taken this beer that was essentially an immigrant's drink, transformed into an American drink in which, you know, there's a little piece of all of us in a glass of American beer.
Here you are.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
American Budweiser beer. A blend of exacting science, amazing technologies, and hundreds of highly skilled people. They all come together in St. Louis, USA for one goal: to produce the world's most popular mega brew at the ultimate factory of Anheuser-Busch.